The last of the faction focus articles came out last week, and this one is another one of the factions I play. It is of course the Blades of Khorne. They were very strong towards the end of 3rd edition, with some exceptionally potent movement shenanigans and tricks they could play, as well as some very decent hitting power, especially with things like 20 Bloodletters or Scarbrand. So let's see what is changing for them in 4th edition, and if they look as good or maybe even better than they currently are. The ever famous Blood Tithe returns as their battle trait. It is a passive that essentially lets you gain Blood Tithe points as units, both enemy and friendly, are killed off over the course of the battle, and then you can spend those points at various phases in the game for particular buffs. Now the list has been cut down a bit, and you also can't use these points for summoning anymore because summoning is gone as a mechanic, but there are still some very good ones to pick from. I would say the best ones are still here. Murderlust is still a 1 tithe ability that now lets you move 3 inches on a unit that isn't in combat. You can still, it states, move into combat with this, but the range is a bit shorter. However, although it is no longer that D6, so you can't get that 6-inch move anymore, it is now more reliable because it is always 3 inches rather than running the risk of rolling a 1 or a 2. So you can still quite reliably get into combat with an enemy even in the enemy movement phase to tie them up or prevent them from moving or charging. So it is still very strong, and I would say arguably for 1 Blood Tithe still potentially a little bit obnoxious. The Spell Eater Curse remains as a reaction and allows you for still 2 Blood Tithe to just unbind a spell. There's no ifs, no buts, no rolls. You just unbind a spell for 2 Blood Tithe, which is still absolutely fantastic for Khorne. It's going to make you very good at shutting down those key enemy spells when they really do need to get them off. Now you can only use Blood Tithe if you haven't already used one in this phase or in this turn, so you can't use this to unbind 2 or 3 spells even if you have the Blood Tithe for it. It is just going to be 1 spell that you unbind in a given turn, but it is still very useful and can mean that that key critical spell they need to get off, you can deny them. The next option is Brass Skull Meteor, which is now 4 Blood Tithe instead of 3. But it has been changed, I would say, for the better. You select an enemy unit that is visible in any hero phase and you roll 8 dice. But it has now had a slight bump because it does mortal damage on a 3+ on those rolls now. In the current 3rd edition version, it's on a 5+ unless the enemy unit has 10 or more wounds or models. So yes, it is a bit more expensive, but it's now much better at killing those smaller 5-man chaff units as well as any 4 or 5 health enemy heroes, and on average with this new version you should do just over 5 mortal damage with this Brass Skull Meteor ability, so you can quite feasibly kill those slightly squishier enemy heroes in their own hero phase, which is quite funny and potentially very powerful. Heads Must Roll is still your 6 tithe ability. It still gives you +1 to your rend for the rest of the turn, so it could be nice to help you out if you've got a few key combats going on across the board. But this one, it is expensive. Getting up to 6 tithe could be a bit tricky because even though you may have lots of units dying and it's both yours and your opponent's, you will likely be wanting to spend some tithe throughout the game on things like the Murderlust or the Spell Eater Curse that we saw just earlier. And then likewise, Slaughter Triumphant, this is your big one. This costs you 8 tithe. And whilst this one is a lot better than I would say Heads Must Roll, this one gives you +1 attack to all Blades of Khorne units for the rest of the battle. Or alternatively, you can pick a Bloodthirster that has been destroyed and you can return a replacement one to the battlefield 9 inches from enemies. So this is an incredibly strong ability. +1 attack army wide is massive. And then of course, returning a whole Bloodthirster to your army could just be the ultimate flex if you really want to show off to an enemy. But again, like Heads Must Roll, getting to that 8 Tithe is going to be the big issue. It is going to take at least a few turns to get 8 dead units. So I think by the time you get this, it may well not have the biggest impact. By the time you get those 8 Tithe and you can use this ability, it's probably going to be turn 3. And by that time, you may know if you are already really far ahead and you're already probably going to win, or alternatively, you might be so far behind that even bringing a Bloodthirster back might not be enough to swing the game in your favor. So yes, it is hilariously strong and it can be an awesome check out what I can do flex on your opponent. But I think most of the time, based on what we've seen of this battle trait, you will be using those lower Tithe abilities throughout the game rather than saving your points up for things like Heads Must Roll or Slaughter Triumphant. All in all though, it is a good ability still. The lower cost ones are very key and very powerful. They give you some really solid mobility, some good anti-magic defense, and then also help you snipe out some of those squishier enemy heroes, which I think just in terms of an overall game plan is going to help you win more than saving up for those more expensive ones. We get to see a cool formation as well, which is aimed at a combined arms list of both mortals and demons. The Khorne Legion gives you the rule Butcher of Nations, which allows you to essentially, after a demon unit has used a fight ability, you can use this once per turn, and then after they've fought, you can pick a Bloodbound unit, which is your sort of mortal followers unit. So you pick a Bloodbound unit within 12 inches of the demon unit that used the fight ability, and your Bloodbound unit can't have fought yet, and they get to use a fight ability immediately. So you can basically double fight with a unit of demons and then a unit of mortals. So something like a Bloodthirster can go in, fight, and then a unit of Skull Crushers nearby that also charged in can then immediately fight after them. So it's really cheeky and really quite powerful. It may be something your opponent isn't expecting, to get 2 rounds of units hitting into their unit before they get to swing. And as I said, it really does reward this combined arms style of list, which up throughout 3rd edition wasn't really a thing. The book in 3rd had very much distinction between demon and mortal side, and people kind of went heavily into one or the other. So I do like this. I think it's a really fun, potentially powerful formation, and I think the theme of it is quite good too. I'm hoping that it means going forward in 4th edition, we will see more of an option for bringing a mixed list of demons and mortals. So I really like that because I love all of the Khorne range. I love the demons and the mortal side of things. So being able to bring both and not feel like you are sort of missing out on the full potential of the army, like you sometimes do with the 3rd edition book, is a really good option. We don't really get to see a spell or manifestation. They show us the prayer Hexgorger Skulls, which has got a chant value of 4, but they don't actually show us the warscroll for the Hexgorger Skulls, so we don't know what they do. Aside from a little blurb that says they nullify casting attempts, we don't know whether that is an extra unbind or reducing the cast roll of wizards nearby, or maybe giving your units near to this Hexgorger Skulls a ward save or something. We just don't know, but it is clearly some more anti-magic power for the Blades of Khorne, which is always a very, very welcome thing. Of course, we also get to see some of the revamped war scrolls, and of course there is a lot of slaughter and bloodshed involved in most of them. The first up is the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, the massive 2-handed axe-wielding behemoth himself. He is still 16 wounds with a 4-up save, which sounds a little bit squishy, but he has gained an incredibly helpful 5-up ward, which is really good for him and will make a massive difference in his durability. In the current 3rd edition, Khorne demons get a 5-up ward against attacks made from over 8 inches away, but when they get into combat they lose that, or when they get to an enemy within 8 inches they lose that. Now he just has that 5-up ward all the time, so he is going to be much tankier than before, even when he does get into melee. He still has his supremely deadly axe, which is still 5 attacks and degrades down to 3 attacks, much like it does currently, but now it hits on 3s instead of 4s. It still wounds on 2s at 2 rend, and is a flat 5 damage instead of d3 plus 3. So the average is the same, but obviously you can't get that maximum of 6 anymore. But despite that, it is still incredibly deadly, and it also gains the anti-infantry +1 rend rule. So into even a 3-up save infantry like Chaos Warriors, this guy can now do over 11 damage, killing off 5 warriors in a single combat. So he is incredibly good at killing enemy infantry. He still has Outrageous Carnage, which has changed a little bit. Now it's just if you do a critical hit, so on a hit roll of a 6, you do an extra d3 mortal damage to all enemy units within 8 inches. So it actually goes off more than the old version, which procced on a wound roll of a 6. Now it is only d3 damage instead of the flat 4 that it is in 3rd edition at the top bracket, but it's still incredibly strong, and hitting all enemies within 8 inches means you can absolutely demolish enemy castled up armies terrifyingly quickly. He does also get his own rampage with Shattering Charge. This is a very simple rampage. It is an impact hit style rule. After he's charged, you pick an enemy within 1 inch and roll a d3, and on a 2+, they take that much mortal damage. But it is actually better than that, because if it is an infantry unit, they take an extra 3 mortal damage on top. So now he can be doing 5 or 6 mortal damage into an enemy infantry unit before he even swings. And if you haven't been counting that all up, just based on his warscroll and the rules that we've seen, with perfect rolling, and admittedly no one gets perfect rolling, but with perfect rolling, the Insensate Rage Bloodthirster can do 6 damage charging in, 25 damage from his axe, and then an extra 15 damage if you do manage to roll 5 6s on his hit roll, because the Outrageous Carnage is each time an attack makes a critical hit. So each of those 5 attacks, if they rolled a 6, will be doing that d3. So his maximum output is 46 damage in a single combat phase, which is just insane. The Bloodletters are up next, and they haven't changed too much. They're still quite squishy with only a 5-up save, but their 2 wounds do help. They have also gained a 6-up ward natively, which again is really helpful when they get into combat. And then they still have 2 attacks that hit and wound on 3s with 1 rend and 1 damage, and then still doing mortals on crits. So yeah, largely similar to how they are now. They do, however, gain a new thematic ability in the Thinning Veil. This allows you to return d3 slain models to the unit at the end of any turn, as long as your unit of Bloodletters is in combat. So this will just help them stick around that much longer. It means on average you're going to be getting back 2 models at the end of each turn, which really is going to help your Bloodletters turn into a bit more of a grindy unit, which is something they definitely need, especially since you now can't summon small units of them with your Blood Tithe anymore. Karanak also makes an appearance in this faction focus. He has dropped a save to just a 5-up, but he still has 7 wounds, and likewise to the Bloodletters has that new 6-up ward, which is quite nice. His claws and his maw attacks are combined into one profile now, just for ease, so he does actually lose 4 attacks in total, but he's still not too shabby. He hits on 4s, wounds on 3s with 1 rend and 2 damage, and he gains +1 rend against enemy heroes, so he is still quite a good anti-hero assassin style unit. He no longer gets his unbind from the brass collar anymore, which is a shame, I do think, because that was quite a thematic little ability. But he still gets to choose an enemy hero as his prey, and then he can move towards them in your opponent's movement phase after that hero has moved. So he can really put some early pressure onto squishy enemy heroes you may choose, or you can just use this ability to get nearer to an objective, or maybe block an enemy unit that was trying to charge something near to Karanak. So it is quite a useful little tool, I think. He also has the first of the pack passive, which lets him buff a unit of Fleshhounds within 12 inches of him, gives them +2 to their charge rolls, and also lets them ignore the effects of the beast keyword, which, as far as I know, limits their maximum control value. I don't know if it does anything else, but based on what we've seen from things like the Nurglings, from what I remember, it limits their control value. But if it does anything else in terms of negative effects, being able to ignore those could make Fleshhounds just a bit more useful whilst they're near to Karanak. And then finally, we also see the Mortal Blood Warriors. They are kind of like slightly lesser Chaos Warriors, really. They're the same 2 wounds and 3 up save, so they are quite well protected, but they are slightly worse on the offensive front. They only hit on 4s and then wound on 3s with 1 rend and 1 damage. So they're not the most killy, but they can take a Goreglaive. 1 in 10 can take a Goreglaive, which is 2 rend and 2 damage, so that does help a little bit. But even with that, a full unit of 10 will be doing around 8 damage to an enemy 4-up save unit, so they're not super killy, but what they are good at is being a fairly scary anvil. And they are good at that because of their 3-up save and 2 wounds, but what makes them even better as an anvil unit is in their ability No Respite. This is a nice passive that means each time a Blood Warrior is killed by a combat attack and is in combat with the attacking unit, you roll 2 dice, and for each 5+, the attacking unit takes some mortal damage. So you can potentially do a full 20 mortal damage back to an enemy unit if they manage to kill all 10 of your Blood Warriors. So a lot of their actual damage output comes when they die, so they are a very good anvil that can hold the enemy and be tricky to kill, but they also punish the enemy quite well when they do die, and on average with 2 dice each, if a whole 10-man unit is wiped, you'll do around 6 or 7 mortal damage in return, so it is enough to potentially dissuade enemy units from really wanting to wipe them out. It could kill something like 2 Blood Knights if they manage to make a charge into you, so they can be quite a good anvil because they're an anvil that the enemy needs to get rid of, but they almost don't want to because they're going to be hard to kill, and they're also going to do some potentially significant damage back to you when you do manage to kill them. Overall, I think the Blades of Khorne still look super fun with their mechanics. Their war scrolls are very solid, particularly on the demon side from what we've seen, and I do think they are still going to be a strong, powerful, thematic army in the new edition. But as always, what do you make of these changes? And do you think the demon or the mortal side will be the best in 4th edition? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later guys.